for the GoToWebinar, there's a circle with an arrow in it that says show screen. Do you see that?
Yeah. What do you see right now?
So I do see just the slides, but if you go to the show screen, you should have the option on the drop-down arrow. You should have the option to show the screen but blank out the background. And that way, if anything...
There we go. Yep. That's cool.
There you go. Yeah. So that way, just in case, you know.
Yep.
Okay, great. All right. All right. Can you go to the first slide then?
Yeah, absolutely. How many people do we have signed up today?
I think we have 8.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
Actually, yeah, because it's sort of a very specific topic.
It is.
So I think that's a really good turnout. Looks like most of them are attorneys. Someone's from the Baltimore City government. I don't know who that is.
Hey, I realized my next door neighbor's having a party at your guys' pub on Saturday.
Oh, it's like a birthday party?
Yeah, it's his son's birthday party.
Oh, okay, yeah. Yeah. Are you coming?
Yeah, absolutely. See how many beers I can drink.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll see. There? Yeah, I'll be there. I'll be working it, so but that's good. Okay, I'm gonna step away for just a minute. I'll be right back. I think we're good though. What do you think? Looks like everything is up.
Whatever.
Okay, I'll be right back. I'm just gonna run down the hall for a second. I'm gonna put you on hold for a moment. Okay, great. Hello, are you still there?
Yep, I'm still hanging out.
Great. I brought my dog to the office today, but when I close my door, it gets really hot in here because of the direction that we're facing, my windows face. So it's hard for her because if I'm hot, she's even hotter.
Do you walk her in, or do you drive?
Oh, no, I drive. She's too old to walk all this way. I'm too old. Pardon?
How old is she?
She's 10.
10. Oh, we're getting there.
Yeah, starting to show her age, unfortunately. Definitely moving slower. So.
Yeah, as big as she is. Do you ever try, like, joint supplements?
Yeah, she's been getting them for a while now. And she seemed to be doing okay. But she's just, like, very stiff when she gets up, kind of like me. So, and just doesn't like to do stairs so much anymore. So, and I don't know about in your house, but the stairs in our house are pretty steep.
Yeah.
And sort of narrow. So she can go up them pretty easily, but she has a hard time coming down them now. So she's not moving up and down as much as she used to. So, although yesterday we were out last evening, and then all of a sudden she just started running through the park. So you just never know.
Yeah, they have moments. My dog's 14. She has the same problem.
Oh, really? 14? Wow.
Yeah.
I didn't think your dog was that old.
Yeah, she's getting up there.
Wow, that's a long time. Yeah. So do you give her joint supplements or?
Yeah, we do Dasaquin, like chewable pills every day. I think it makes an incredible difference.
Yeah. What is in that? It's called Dasaquin?
Dasaquin, Dasquin.
Is it over the counter?
Yeah, it's over the counter. I order from Chewy when I order food, like once a month.
Uh-huh. Okay. And what's in it? Is it different from like the chondroitin and the glucosamine?
Let me check. I'm not exactly sure what's in it. Probably should have checked that before I started giving my dogs random stuff, but...
Well.
Yeah, glucosamine. I'm not going to be able to say any of these. It's going to sound ridiculous.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I'll
But,
send you the link.
so it's probably the same kind of thing then. Yeah. It's hard when they get older. It's hard to watch them.
Yes, it is. It is hard. Especially, like, we have the same thing. We have the steps problems, and sometimes I might have a neighbor who's got an older lab that's 10, too. Like, you end up carrying them a lot, which is kind of depressing.
That's what happened to our last dog. And when we got this dog, our last dog was like 70 pounds, so a little bit smaller. And so my husband could carry him up and down the stairs. But when we got this dog, he said there's no way he'll be able to carry her.
Yeah, there's no way you're carrying her.
So. But luckily she's pretty independent. She seems to be okay staying downstairs by herself. She's... You know how some dogs are kind of clingy and they need to always be with you, but she's not like that. So that's good. So, okay, well, it looks like it's noon. Are you ready to start? Michael?
Can you hear me now?
Oh, there you are. Great. I thought I lost you there.
I pressed the wrong button. My bad.
Okay. I'm going to go ahead and start then. I'm going to turn it on. I'll introduce myself and then just remind everyone to, and if you can go through the first few slides with me as we talk about them. And then I'll just remind everyone to write the questions in the question box so that we can discuss them at the end, and then let you introduce yourself. How about that?
Sounds good.
Okay, here we go. Let's see. Great. Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Janice, and I'm the director of the Low Income Taxpayer Clinic here at Maryland Volunteer Lawyer Service. And I want to thank everyone for joining us. This should be a very interesting topic. And we're very lucky to have Michael speaking today, and I'll let him introduce himself in just a moment. I do want to go over some just sort of brief information here. If you don't already follow us on social media, please do follow us. And you can see all of the information here on our first page. Could you advance the slide, please, Michael?
Yep.
Great. We do welcome all of you to be a volunteer if you are not already a volunteer. There's lots of benefits of being a volunteer, and you also get to apply some of this great knowledge that you're learning as a volunteer as well. To become a volunteer, you would, or to find cases, you could look at our pro bono portal, which is on our website, but also you can Google pro bono portal MVLS as well, and that will bring you to the portal, which has a listing of all of our available cases. Next slide, please. And this is what it looks like. The cases are broken down into different categories, and if you're interested in a tax case, that's the blue tab that you see over there on the far right. And it will bring up any available cases, a little summary about each case, and then how to find out more about each case. Next slide, please. Great. As a volunteer, you do have access to all of our trainings and our free recorded trainings such as this one. And we also have past trainings also on various other topics. So if there's anything of interest there, you also have access to those as well. Next slide, please. And so finally, I do want to encourage anyone who's not already a volunteer to sign up. Lots of benefits and certainly lots of great ways to learn information as well as networking. One final plug for our Taste of Pro Bono event coming up on March 31st. That's going to be at Union Craft Brewery. It's our big annual event. It's a lot of fun and a great place to network and meet lots of great people. So, and with that, I'm going to turn it over. But before I do, let me just remind everyone, please, if you do have any questions. Oh, here we go. Yes. All right, thanks. If you do have any questions, please, we're going to hold the questions until the end of the presentation just so that we don't interrupt the flow. But please go ahead and write them into the question box when you think of them, and we'll be happy to discuss them at the end. So I'm going to turn it over to Michael then. Thank you.
Yep, absolutely. Hi, everybody. My name is Michael March. I'm a tax attorney here at Rosenberg, Martin, Greenberg. I focus primarily on tax controversies and tax planning, like what we're going to talk about today. Before we get started, I do have two shameless plugs in addition to a Taste for Pro Bono, which is incredible, and it's at Union Craft Brewing, which is a great venue. I am the chair of the Bar Association of Baltimore City's Litigation Committee, and I'm also on the Young Lawyers Division. So we have a networking and happy hour on Tuesday, April 21st, 2020. It's at Little Havana, which is right on Key Highway. Drinks and food are provided, so please come by, meet some of the people, chat with me, tell me how much you like opportunity zones and tax controversy, and we can kind of go from there. But please stop by. The Baltimore City Litigation Committee also took over the Baltimore Barrister, which is the Baltimore City Bar's newspaper. So the next upcoming winter issue has 8 different articles from young practitioners like myself in the area. And it ranges from, I have an article in there about opportunity zones. We have a great article about resident agents. What else was also included in there? Some funding options, bankruptcy, estate planning for business owners as well as individuals. So lots of really good stuff. I encourage you to check it out. So it's a great way to kind of grab some additional information.
So Michael, how does one get a copy of the Baltimore Barrister? Is that something that you join the group to receive, or?
Yeah, so if you are a member of the Baltimore City Bar, you should get an email with a link, basically. It's all online now. I'm not sure if we even have print versions. We might, I'm not sure, but for the most part, it's just an email. If you need it or if you don't get a copy, please feel free to email me and I'll send over a copy. And if you follow my LinkedIn page, it'll be posted on there too, so that's another way to grab it.
Great, thank you.
Absolutely. So today we're going to be talking about opportunity zones. This is my attempt at a spring background here because I'm excited for the warm weather, sick of the cold weather. It's beautiful out today, though, obviously, so I'll take that. So let's start. What is an opportunity zone? So as we all know, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act was passed 2 or so years ago, and inside of that was 26 U.S.C. Section 1400Z-1 and 1400Z-2. D-1 is primarily how it's set up through basically the governor proposes a tract of land and it's confirmed by the Secretary of the Treasury. D2 has a lot more of the granular details that we're going to go through today. If you're going to start researching, this is where we want to start with. So an opportunity zone is an economically distressed community where new investments under certain conditions may be eligible for preferential tax treatment. Localities qualify as opportunity zones if they've been nominated for that designation by the state, and that nomination has been certified by the Secretary of the U.S. Treasury over his delegation of the authority to the Internal Revenue Service. If you have additional questions, some of which I'll cover today, but there are a few more that you could probably grab. There's a great IRS just kind of Q&A on there that offers some of the basic answers that you're kind of working through in your head about whether or not this is eligible. And the basic purpose of opportunity zones, and I'll come back to this 2 or 3 times throughout this slide deck, is really was to spur economic development and job creation in distressed communities. So it was a way to kind of help out the communities by offering tax incentives. So what are the tax benefits? This is what everybody needs to know. So investments that are held for 5 years get a 10% reduction of gain that was deferred. Investments held for 7 years get a 15% reduction of gain that was deferred. And if the investment is held for 10 years, basis of the property is adjusted to fair market value. This is a lot more easily understood in the context of an example, and we're going to walk through an example throughout our slideshow here that I think will probably shed some light on it. So in order to get this preferential tax treatment, there's a few hoops that you have to jump through. These are the 4 main ones. This is not an exhaustive list by any means, and with that caveat today, this is not legal advice. I'm merely offering a foray into what the opportunity zone context is and whether or not, and hopefully give you the ability to determine whether or not it is suitable for one of your clients, or maybe this is just cocktail knowledge. So the first step is the taxpayer must sell a qualified capital gain. Generally, this is capital assets. Almost all the time I see it as real property. It could be stock as well. I guess technically it could be an intangible. I haven't seen that yet, but everything that I've dealt with so far in this context has been real property. So after you sell that capital asset, the taxpayer has 180 days to reinvest that same money into a qualified opportunity fund. And I'm going to walk through each one of these rules afterwards because I know this is going to prompt a lot of questions. After the money is placed into the fund, the opportunity fund must acquire property within an opportunity zone, like we talked about on the previous slide that's been designated. Some of the ones I've seen, so Long Island I know has long swaths of opportunity zones. I see a good bit in South Baltimore as well as Northeast Baltimore. And I've also been dealing with some on the Eastern Shore. So they're everywhere. There's a great interactive map on the IRS website if you want to Google it. But yeah, there's tons of them out there, and it's pretty prevalent. And the last rule that we're going to cover today is that the taxpayer must substantially improve, and substantially improve is a term of art that we're going to talk about, and the new property within 30 months. So it's a timeline to kind of make sure the investors are pumping money into this opportunity zone. And like I said, this is not an exhaustive list, just a brief overview. So here's the example. On January 1st, 2020, taxpayer A sells his restaurant in Fells Point for $1 million. 5 years ago, taxpayer A purchased the restaurant for $250,000. Throughout this, I'm going to say this a couple of different times, but these are all kind of simplified versions. I know there's a lot of other things that will go into capital gains calculations and cost basis and everything else like that. But my point is just to give you a brief example so that we can keep referring back to this. Thereafter, on February 15th, 2020, taxpayer purchases a vacant building in South Baltimore. Fortunately for taxpayer, the vacant building is located in an opportunity zone. So how do the foregoing rules apply to taxpayer A? So what is a qualified capital gain? Generally, like I said, it's the sale of stock or real estate with an unrelated party. I would tell you to look at 26 U.S.C. Section 1221 for what a capital asset is. On top of the capital asset requirements, there is also 3 general requirements. And to caveat this, most of the rules that I am citing in here either come from regulations or proposed regulations. So far, there's been 2 sets of proposed regulations that have been really, really good. Each one's a couple hundred pages long, so it makes for great nighttime reading if you're so inclined. But pretty much everything is coming from there. So on top of it being a capital asset, there are 3 general requirements. The gain must be recognized before January 1st, 2027. The The eligible gain is not a gain generated by a transaction with a related party. Related parties are family members, corporations, or partnerships with 20% of the same interest. And this one's kind of interesting. Two corporations which are members of the same controlled group. And of course, the gain cannot be previously used in an opportunity zone context. You can't double count, basically, to keep racking up those tax incentives. I was reading today that depreciation recapture is not available, but Section 1231 assets are available. So a little bit more there. What is a qualified opportunity fund? So step one is to research the land, make sure the land that is being purchased or is already owned, like we'll talk about later, is in fact inside of a opportunity zone. Last thing you want to do is go through all this analysis and have the land not be located in an opportunity zone. So start there. Generally, step number two is to open your qualified opportunity fund after the capital asset has been sold. So a qualified opportunity fund is a corporation or partnership organized to facilitate investment in an opportunity zone. A lot of times when you're setting up LLC agreements, it asks for what the reason is or why we're opening this LLC, and that's exactly why, to facilitate investment in opportunity zone. And what I'm doing, and I think this is fairly common for most practitioners, they're opening up an LLC that either can be treated as a partnership or a corporation for federal tax purposes. Obviously, based on the facts and circumstances of each case, a partnership or a corporation might be more applicable. There are a few different rules that I don't touch on today in depth. One of them today is the 90% rule. Not that these rules, there's also a 50% rule too, but not that these rules aren't important. They're just starting to get into the weeds. And the point of today that I wanted to just give you this basic knowledge of what's going on. So the 90% rule is 90% or more of the assets must be invested in qualified opportunities and property. There's also two-tier and one-tier structures. So some of the ones I've set up have been two-tier. We have a holding company above a fund, and they're kind of operating together. That changes this 90% rule and is kind of outside of the context of today, but probably something you should still know. Failure to maintain the 90% rule is a penalty that's administered every 6 months. So you set up an LLC or two LLCs depending on how you're structuring your transaction, and then the taxpayer self-certifies that the LLC is a qualified opportunity fund. This is done on their annual return. So you're going to have a Form 8949 for the previous capital asset that was sold, and then in addition to that, you might have a Form 8997 and 8996, depending on the facts. So it's kind of self-reporting in that aspect and saying, hey, this is my qualified opportunity zone, here's the gain that's been deferred, and this is kind of what's going on. The biggest thing I see, and the only thing I would mention here, is sometimes I see people with rollover retirements that are not taxable. The distribution from the retirement is reported to the IRS. In the same context, your sale of a capital asset is most likely reported to the IRS. So these ancillary forms, the 89, 97, and 96, and the 49, you need to report that so you're putting the IRS on notice that you're deferring the gain. Otherwise, the IRS is going to get really confused when you submit your tax return, right? Because you're not going to show the capital gain. They're going to be confused about why it wasn't reported, and most likely you're going to get a CP 2000 notice showing you what the difference is. So CP 2000 notices are never fun to respond to. They take forever. So I would definitely advise you to kind of report this up front. Don't try and catch it on the back end. It's a lot easier that way. So you have your sale of your capital asset. You've created an LLC. Now you've opened a bank account. Now you have 180 days to place the cash from the old sale of the capital asset into this qualified opportunity zone fund. And that's kind of the first couple of steps here. So like I said on the bottom here, consider where the land is located. If the land is in Virginia, we're looking for a Virginia LLC most likely. It could be a Maryland LLC, but you got a couple extra steps. Same thing if it's located in New York. If it's located in Maryland, it's going to change where you're setting up your LLC, or at least the analysis behind it. And there's also relevant resident agent notices that you need to fill out with the LLC form. And I'm sure everybody knows, but just to reiterate, a resident agent is someone who's designated to accept service on behalf of the organization. So definitely something that's pertinent, definitely something you want to be on the forefront of your mind and considering when opening all of these. The next step after I place the money, or we get the money placed into a bank account, is I start creating new operating agreements for the entities, right? I want a piece of paper that objectively says what we're here for, what we're doing, what the purpose of the LLC is. Obviously, these are internal documents, but nonetheless, good things to be covered. And I would say in the backdrop here, one of the things that I'm doing is preparing for an audit, right? I'm not saying you're going to be audited, but in the unfortunate event that you are audited, we do want all of this documented, right? We want the LLCs documented very well. We want the operating agreements documented and showing what we're doing. We want the 8949. We want the 8997, the 8996. We want this to be as easy for an auditor to follow as possible. As all of these are probably only a year or two old, there's still a lot of questions left out there. So I do think these will be audited in the future, and it is really building that backup documentation now so that you're prepared for that audit. So here's the crux of what I've been dealing with recently. The last three that I've done have dealt with this specific issue. So in 1400Z-2, it says the property must be acquired after 12/31/2017. But what happens if you already own land inside of an opportunity zone? That's the real question, is how do we get around this not get around, how do we comply with this 12/31/2017 rule, but at the same time take advantage of some of the assets that we already have available? The proposed regulations, the most recent proposed regulations have set out that a ground lease, or generally a lease in general, satisfies this requirement as long as it's operated with a couple of different things in mind. It has to be an arm's length transaction, or what the proposed regulations call a market rate lease. A lot of times I look at what's being transferred and see what a market value lease would be, specifically based on where the geographical region is, right? So Maryland's going to be different than New York, that's going to be different than Virginia. The second rule is that the lessor and the lessee, if they're related, they cannot remit a prepayment to the lessor for more that exceeds 12 months. I've kind of racked my brain thinking about why this would be, because it's kind of odd, right? Like you sort of have one hand paying the other one, but no prepayments outside of 12 months are really available. If anybody has any light on that, I would love to hear a comment, but I'm sure it has some type of rule and something that's relevant. All right, so next is substantial improvement in original use. Let's go back to our vacant building that taxpayer A purchased. So assume that $250,000 was the total purchase of the property, including the land as well as the building. After that, using FSAT or some other type of appraisal, maybe we would allocate specifically the amount for the land and then also the amount for the building. Based on the proposed regulations, only the building has to be substantially improved. So in our example here, you'd have to taxpayer A has to contribute at least $150,000 to the building to be considered a substantial improvement. Like we talked about before, this substantial improvement has to happen within 30 months of acquisition. So taxpayer A purchases that vacant building in South Baltimore. We've got 30 months to pump the money into it. Now, more applicable here, and since my building is vacant, which I'm going to talk about, or abandoned buildings is how the proposed regulations call them, if it's the original use of the property. So a lot of times I think it's easiest to understand this. I read an old case about yachts. So if a yacht was operating in another area, you purchase it and bring it into the new opportunity zone area, that would be the original use of the property. Same thing for abandoned buildings. If an abandoned building was more than 5 years prior to the acquisition, it does not require a substantial improvement, right? There is no $150,000 analysis as explained above. The proposed regulations just came out with, if it's 3 years vacant after the surrounding area was designated as a qualified opportunity zone, it's also considered original use. So the point being, it's circumventing the substantial improvement rule because it is the original use. And to go back to what we talked about earlier, the whole goal of this is to get money into economically impoverished areas. I can't think of anything more applicable than a vacant or abandoned property, right? It serves no use to the public. Next thing you know, you have an investor coming in and putting money into getting it up and operational. So it kind of fits with the overall thought process of creating a better area for the residents. Another one of the things, and this is again back to making sure all of the documentation is required, taxpayers need to create a detailed plan of how the funds will be spent. A lot of times I'm dealing with developers on these, and this is all inside of their head. So it's really important to have an incredibly detailed plan that says, hey, this is what we're fixing. this is when we are fixing it, and this is how much it's going to cost. Sometimes if the details are already hammered out with the developer, sometimes I will say who is fixing it too, just to add that extra layer. Or it might be good to attach some of the contractor invoice agreements that the land is being improved by, or the building is being improved by. Again, this is all just creating a backlog to make sure that you are adhering to the regulations as developed by the IRS. So certain businesses are actually excluded. This is kind of like a morality thing, I guess, for the IRS to say that, hey, we don't want these certain types of businesses inside of an opportunity zone context. So almost above the substantial improvement, pumping money in, we don't want certain types of businesses in these areas. So the first one is any private or commercial golf courses. Found that to be interesting. Country clubs, massage parlors, hot tub facilities, suntan facilities, racetracks or other facilities used for gambling. I'm an avid sportsbook follower, so I was a little disappointed by this one. I was hoping maybe some of the swaths in South Baltimore could be created for a sportsbook or a racetrack or something like that, but no go on these regulations. And the last one is any store whose principal business of which is the sale of alcoholic beverages for consumption off of the premises. So fortunately, it doesn't cover restaurants. I think hotels are pretty prevalent in this type of context, too. That's what I've been mostly working on is hotels. But no sale of alcoholic beverages, so no liquor stores, no beer stores, nothing like that. At least in Maryland, they're separated. So I don't know how, maybe this would be a good question for somebody else. Again, too, like I know in certain states you could have Walmarts or gas stations or other items selling alcohol that can be consumed off of the premises. And you're dealing with kind of a mixed-use type of property. I think that would be an interesting analysis. But the final item that I've been pondering as well is these new dispensaries that are popping up everywhere. I think because the federal government has not specifically said that dispensaries or the distribution of marijuana is legal, they're not going to say that dispensaries are excluded or included from this list. But again, if anybody has any comments or any thought process on this, I'd be happy to discuss or share or think about it together, but kind of an interesting thought. So this is where I'm currently at right now, is what is an inclusion event. So based on the tax benefits that I outlined earlier, you sell your capital asset, the new asset that you have purchased inside of an opportunity zone, it has to be held 5 years to get a 10% reduction in the deferred capital gain. If you held it 7 years, you get that 15% reduction. If you held it all the way to 10 years, then the new property located in the opportunity zone gets a step up in fair market value. That's the greatest tax benefit of all, because after 10 years, you could sell the property and walk away without any gain being recognized, which is pretty important, especially for the type of money that's being pumped into some of these properties. What I'd run into is more difficult is that it's hard to plan for 2 years away, let alone 5, 7, or 10 years away. So I think that's an interesting thing to note. And an inclusion event, so to kind of add to that, an inclusion event is essentially cashing out of that investment. And I think that's the overall understanding of this is, I've been asked a couple of times, is how do we get our money back out? Can we get our money back out? Or is it stuck for that 5, 7, or 10-year period that's going on? So here are a few of the considered inclusion of events. Again, this is in the new proposed regulations. I believe it's page 41, somewhere around there. Don't quote me on page 41, but it's in the new proposed regulations. So a taxable disposition is a sale of a qualifying investment, partnership interest, or investment in a corporation. So if I was to sell my opportunity zone fund to a third party, that would count as an inclusion event. I wouldn't be able to take the tax benefits, assuming it happened before the 5, 7, or 10-year period, and I am now recognizing gain that I would not otherwise be recognizing. Second one here is a sale that results in more than 25% in the S corporation interest. So maybe I'm not selling my entire opportunity zone fund, but I'm selling a quarter of it. Based on the proposed regulations, that could be a cashed out or a inclusion event as well, and hurting your tax benefits. In certain cases, a transfer by a parent of an interest in a partnership that directly or indirectly holds a qualifying investment. So you can see where this is kind of all going. It's selling that second entity or the upper level entity that's operating and holding the Qualifying Opportunity Zone Fund. And the idea is that the IRS wants the investor to keep their money into the Opportunity Zone for as long as possible. Make sure that all the benefits of what the policy is kind of behind this is being executed, right? The idea is to drive economic as well as job growth in the area. Backing back out of that area would not be doing that. So I guess that's kind of the policy argument behind here. A transfer by gift of a qualifying investment. So this one I found be a little bit more interesting, and I could see the IRS's brain kind of working here to say, all right, which ways are people going to try and get this money into different hands? So outside of a sale, you could also not gift this to somebody else. You have to maintain that ownership. I believe the proposed regulations have different rules for if there's a death of the taxpayer, but I'd have to look it up to provide greater detail than that. And lastly, a distribution to a partner that has value in excess of basis of the partner's qualifying partnership interest. This would be like a liquidating dividend type of concept, basically. And please note again, this is not an exhaustive list. It's in the new proposed regulations. Like I said, I believe it's page 41. But I would say to yourself, generally, I think if an investor is trying to cash out, get their money back out of the investment, then this is kind of where we are headed. The proposed regulations, and I have to do a little bit more research on this myself, as a 2-year rule as far as collateralizing the Opportunity Zone Fund itself. This is kind of where I'm headed next in part of my thought process. And I would also, anybody that's interested in these types of things, I would point you to the Rosenberg Martin Greenberg's tax microsite. I had an article probably about 6 to 8 months ago that talked about some of the questions I had after the first proposed regulations. And in that Baltimore Barrister newsletter is a new article that I wrote about opportunity zones and some of the new developments, specifically what we talked about before with the ground lease, because that's what I've run into the most, is that investors already held the property in the opportunity zone area. They're running a ground lease in between two new different entities to circumvent or get compliant with that 1231 acquired after rule, and that's kind of where we're heading there. But I can tell you my next article will be on the collateralization rules and the 2-year rule and how it's possible to get money back out of this investment. I just haven't gotten there yet, but that's on the radar next. So here's my contact information. I know I kind of went pretty fast through that. We might have some questions, and I'm happy to answer as many as we can. The one thing I would say is that we have 2 sets of proposed regulations. We got a couple of statutes. So sometimes it is kind of thinking on your feet, walking through it. There's lots of great articles out there on the internet by accounting firms as well as law firms who are working through the same thing as I am. And yeah, that's where I would kind of leave it.
Great. Thank you. Thanks for that broad overview. That was very helpful because I felt like I didn't know what was going on. So now at least I feel like I have a general background now. So anyone who has questions, please go ahead and fill them in the question box, and we'll be happy to share them with the group. I had a few questions myself, and my first question was about the first rule, which is that you must sell qualified capital gain. I think if you can go back to that first, the first slide here. Maybe one more. So I guess the first rule is that you have to have this qualified capital gain. So does that mean that then only people who have something already can take advantage of this? I mean, so like
Yeah, so you still got there, I apologize. So basically, yes, the answer to your question is yes. You have to have a capital asset that is in the process or has been sold. So it's really, in the context I've seen it, is selling one hotel for another, selling a restaurant and investing that in a new opportunity zone. I haven't seen the opportunity for stock yet, but I think that would also be included, as well as I think I said intangible assets. So you are starting, and the closest we have there, so opportunity zones are not completely pulled out of thin air. This has been in operation twice before this. Once was in the Gulf after a couple of different hurricanes to increase the amount of money coming in. And then the second time was that D.C. actually had a similar program. Obviously, both of the programs that were set up before were on a much smaller scale. This is federal and completely encompasses the United States. But a lot of times if I have questions, that's kind of where I go to because they've been around a lot longer. They've been in operation. There's cases on them. so you have questions. Obviously, it's not going to line up one-to-one with exactly what we're doing now because of the new statutes and regulations, but I think it is a good precursor into the way that the IRS or the way that this whole system is being set up.
So then, excuse me, I'm sorry. If it's only limited then to people who have a previous capital or previous asset, then does that sort of remove new investors or new people who might want to get involved?
Yeah, I think you do need that previous capital asset. I guess you could hurry up and sell something and put it into a new, but yeah, for the most part, it's developers who kind of already been up and running. And I think what I've really seen is kind of like some of the developers I've worked with have like, okay, I'm working on 2 or 3 different projects right now, and it just so happens one of those projects is located inside of an opportunity zone. So it goes from, okay, we have 3 different projects to let's shift our focus onto the project inside of an opportunity zone. So I think this is mainly meant for real estate holders, people who are already developing, basically. I mean, the regulations and the statutes were created, as well as the Tax Cut and Jobs Act, were created and passed by the Congress and President Trump, who is a real estate investor. So I don't know if he created this because it's what he was seeing or what was going on, but it generally is available for developers, people who already have real property that are kind of in the real estate business, basically. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I will add a caveat. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I know that it's out there. I haven't really looked into this yet, but I know there are like funds or real estate and REITs, real estate investment trusts that you can invest in and do the same thing. I haven't looked into them. Again, if somebody had comments on those, I would love to hear if anybody's invested in them or where they're located. But I mean, I think that would be really interesting. So if you held stock through an LLC and sold it and you wanted to invest into an opportunity zone, but you didn't have enough money or enough deferred capital gain to purchase the land outright, I would imagine there's probably funds or, like I said, real estate investment trusts out there for you. I don't have any on hand applicable use or experience with them yet, but I do think they're out there.
So really, it seems like this is probably targeted then towards more established developers or people who have been around for a while. Like I couldn't, if I won the lottery and decided I wanted to invest in Baltimore City and purchase some these abandoned properties, then I couldn't do it because I wouldn't have a capital asset to have sold and gotten some capital gains, or.
Yeah. First thing, if you win the lottery, first thing you do is come get me. Second, won't have to practice law anymore. So, but to answer your question, no, like lottery winnings wouldn't be eligible. You're really looking for a capital asset that you've already held and are prepared to sell.
Well, so yeah, so it does sort of exclude some people if you don't already have a capital asset, but I guess people who are looking into opportunity zones probably already are thinking along these lines. But then, and then so a question about the vacant and abandoned buildings. You mentioned that you don't have to have it doesn't necessarily fall into that substantial improvement rule because there may not be a value to begin with. So really, any improvement could be considered within this rule, though, no? I mean,
yeah. So it places a priority on almost finding abandoned or vacant buildings and kind of updating them and getting them ready to go. I've seen this context in a restaurant. So there was a vacant building, and we needed basically the funds that were deferred from the previous gain were used to update the kitchen and kind of get the building to be a restaurant. That's another thing that I would say. So in the substantial improvement context, you have to think about what type of improvements are actually going to increase the adjusted basis of the property. Generally, those are things that are fixed to the property itself. If you think like an HVAC system, a new kitchen, where like you need a hood to ventilate, anything that fixtures that are permanently affixed to the property itself. So it is increasing that adjusted basis. But if the building is empty for more than 5 years prior to the acquisition, or 3 years after it's been designated a qualified opportunity zone, which hasn't happened yet, there is no substantial improvement requirement. I think that kind of falls in line with the policy of let's get these vacant. I know Baltimore City especially has a problem with this. Let's get these vacant buildings out of here. Let's get something in there, and not just from an aesthetic standpoint, but from a job creation and economic development standpoint, it really makes sense. So I love this rule. I think it's one of my favorites of this whole thing, just because I am a Baltimore City resident. I live and work here, and I'd love to see less vacant buildings. I'd love to see more money poured into those vacant buildings as well.
Yes, absolutely, definitely. So I thought that rule about the not being able to sell alcohol or alcohol for outside consumption was interesting, because especially in certain states like Virginia, where grocery stores can sell alcohol inside their location, so it seems like that would be a rule where it might be tricky for, like you were saying, a restaurant or any place that might have potentially alcohol to go.
Yeah, so I haven't run into this yet, but I'm wondering if there's some type of a provision in the proposed regulations that say if you have a mixed-use building, whether or not it's a percentage analysis or an allocation or maybe even a split of the tax benefits. That's an interesting question, and not something I've had to directly confront yet, so I don't know the answer to it, but interesting to think about nonetheless.
Mm-hmm.
It's also interesting. It's like a bit of a morality thing, I think, by the IRS. It's like the IRS's morals are being imposed here on developers, which I always find kind of interesting. I think there's a certain morality to the tax code as well as tax returns, so it's interesting for them to kind of proceed with that morality type of understanding in the opportunity zone context.
Yes, definitely. But on the flip side, I guess, in terms of you also have to think about not only that one specific building in the opportunity zone, but you want to look at sort of the broader perspective of what kind of a neighborhood are you creating, perhaps, and that might be, perhaps there's negative connotations applied to some of these places, and so it might not encourage other developers or investors then if for whatever reason, because some of these places have negative connotations associated with them.
I guess golf courses have a negative connotation. I don't know.
Although it's hard to imagine a golf course like in the middle of Baltimore City. So could you well, I guess not a golf course, but so opportunity zones are not always just in the cities. Then are there some rural areas that could potentially be turned into a golf course in an open space like that?
Not inside of an opportunity zone, right? So you wouldn't get the tax benefits. But no, there's plenty. Obviously, opportunity zones are not just in Baltimore City. In the state of Maryland, there's some all the way on the eastern shore, like southeast. Like I said, I live in Baltimore, so I know the area pretty well. South Baltimore is pretty big. Northeast Baltimore, Long Island in New York has large swaths as well. They're all over the state. I would. If somebody was seriously interested in investing, the first thing I would tell you to do is go look at the map on the IRS's website. It's very interactive. It's very clear, too, so it helps you understand. And they also give you what's called, census. I didn't know this thing existed before. It's called census tracts, basically. And you can look it up from there to make sure, 100% sure that your land is located inside the opportunity zone.
Great. Well, that's really helpful, then, in terms of determining where you want to even make a purchase to begin with, so. Definitely.
Yeah.
So now you mentioned that the tax benefits are available after 5 years of being in there, or 7 years, or 10 years, and then so it seems like the max is 10 years, and then so there's no benefit in owning it for longer than 10 years. Is this a reason for people then to leave after 10 years?
Yeah, I would say it almost de-incentivizes investments outside of 10 years, right? So you hit the 10th year and your basis in the property jumps to fair market value. So assuming if you sold it for fair market value, you would have no gain on the sale. Now think about if you held that property for 15 or 20 years. Generally, if your investment is being successful, the fair market value of it is going to continue to increase. So it's almost like you're de-incentivized to keep the property outside of the 10-year period, because then you're going to pay capital gains on it. But like I said, a lot of the developers I talk to have a hard time planning for 2 years, let alone 5, 7, or 10 years. So I think it is a little bit of a wait-and-see type of approach.
So maybe that is appropriate for the pool of people that would be investing, or that this would be targeting then. So
Yep.
if maybe 10 years for them is a long time, although maybe for others 10 years doesn't seem like a long time. Like when you're buying a house, you don't expect to necessarily move in 10 years. You might, but many people will, because your mortgage is for so long that many people might be thinking of being in their house for a longer period of time. But maybe developers are different. There's a different mindset there.
Or maybe it's an opportunity to move money around too. Like the developers I see are always kind of keeping their eye out for the next investment. So maybe it's, hey, we have this coming up in a year or two. Let's start our tax planning techniques. That also brings me to a good point. So the main comparison I get a lot of times from developers is how does this relate from a 1031 transaction? How is it different from a 1031 transaction? So the first capital asset that you sold, just to use our restaurant context, the capital gain doesn't go away, right? It's just deferred. It's deferred for that 5 years, or it's deferred for 7 years if held. So eventually you are going to pay that capital gain, when the time comes. It's time to pay Uncle Sam definitely a rise. But since it's 5 and 7 years out, I think it does offer additional tax planning techniques if maybe to pair a loss, maybe look at your portfolio and see what else you could do at the same time. So I've had that conversation with a couple of people of how do we plan for this 5-year event, or how do we plan for this 7-year event, or what kind of options do we have at that time. So interesting.
Yeah, definitely something that someone needs to seek advice on and not just go into this blindly. Definitely.
Yeah. I don't know. One of the great things about this is that I've been paired with a lot of CPAs as well as accountants in the area who are saying, hey, like, I know this is viable. Can this work? Like, what are the details? And then also, like I walked through on the other slide, how do we report this correctly? And I do think reporting this correctly is incredibly important, because you can't, so many times responding to CP 2000s and differences that the IRS notices on returns is difficult. You never know what's really going to happen, even no matter how well you articulate the situation. So you want to make all your ducks in a row when you're actually filing the return. Make sure everything is reported correctly. Otherwise, it could cause complications on the back end.
Definitely. And there's always, I really like your point about, even though it may not happen, it's just you want to prepare from the beginning for a potential audit so that you have everything ready to go in case that does happen. Is there any sense of how long that might be? Is there like a statute of limitations for the IRS to audit on something like this, or?
Yeah, I mean, excluding fraud or any type of other activity, you would have 3 years from then to audit and look through these records. So that's kind of where it's at. I see moving forward in the future, I think sales and use tax audits, especially with the Wayfair decision and those marketplace facilitators, is going to be huge. And then I also think some of these opportunity zones will be audited too, just based on the sheer dollar amount. Because generally the developers moving this money around or buying land or buying the property, it's pretty decent-sized numbers. And a lot of times I think that grabs the IRS's attention.
Right. Okay. Well, great. Well, I think this has been really helpful. It's really certainly opened my eyes to this, because I really had no idea what was going on with this group, since it's not something that I deal with, obviously in my practice. But it's been very helpful to understand this for people that will, to just sort of get a sense of what's going on out there. And it certainly sounds like it could be very exciting. I'm glad to hear that people are taking advantage of this, and hopefully, we'll, as a resident of Baltimore City, hopefully we will start to see some improvements as well. So, very good. So I would like to thank everyone who has joined us this afternoon, and thank Michael for doing this really great presentation. And we'll be able to have this posted on our website. So for those of you who wish to go back and review it again in the future, just let me know, and I can direct you to where it is. So thanks again, Michael. This was great.
Yep, absolutely. Thank you for having me. And if anybody has any questions, my last slide has my contact information. Feel free to shoot me an email, give me a call. I'm more than happy to discuss. And if anybody is experiencing their own opportunities, their own cases, I'd love to hear about them too. So feel free to give me a call. Check out the article that comes out in the Baltimore Barrister in the next couple of weeks, and go from there.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.